to order. Karen, because we do have a mixed group between the downtown group and EDA, instead of doing full roll, do you just want to note attendees for attendance tonight?
Sure.
Very good. Our first item tonight is the Pledge of Allegiance. I invite you to join us in the pledge. If you'd like to shut off your camera before you rise, you can do so on the bottom left of your Zoom tray. And we'll see if we get the flag here. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Members of the downtown group, we do have a couple of items of official EDA business to take care of here. So if you will just bear with us for a few minutes, we will be at the downtown, ready to resume the downtown conversation. But we do have a couple of administrative items first. So hold tight with us. First up is tonight is to approve the agenda. Could I entertain a motion to approve?
I so move.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Karen, could we have a roll call, please?
So I have Judy and Jenny, is that correct?
Yes.
Well,
You can
second.
just take Judy. We both seconded. Pick one.
I have Member Blake Roberts,
Aye.
Member Huntosh,
Aye.
Member Husnick,
Aye.
Member Finneman,
Aye.
Member Lorge,
Aye.
Member Erickson,
Aye.
and President Bain.
Aye. Agenda is approved. Our next item this evening is to approve the minutes of the EDA meeting from January 11th, 2021. I will entertain either a motion or any changes. Go ahead, Mark.
Oh, well, because it's mentioned, it's an awkward proposition to keep talking about, but the Castlewood project. Since Mr. Casey has not answered my inquiry, and since Stella's ownership, I don't think has had any further conversations. And since I don't see anything on the Planning Commission for resubmittal, I wonder if Mr. Casey would just describe how he sees that project moving forward.
So can we table that until we get to city updates towards the end of the meeting?
Certainly.
Thank you. Back to minutes from January 11th. Is there,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sam.
Mark, I make a motion that we approve the minutes, the January 11th meeting.
We have a motion from Member Husnick. Is there a second?
I'll second.
And a second from Member Finneman. And Karen, could we have a roll call, please?
Member Roberts,
Aye.
Member Huntosh,
Aye.
Member Husnick,
Aye.
Member Finneman,
Aye.
Member Lorge,
Aye.
Member Erickson,
Aye.
President Bain.
Aye. Minutes approved. Next agenda item this evening is the Downtown Committee Workshop, January 25th, 2021. I will entertain either a motion or any changes.
I move to approve.
Motion from Member Finneman
I'll second.
and a second from Member Huntosh. And Karen, one more roll call vote, please.
Member Roberts,
Abstain.
Member Huntosh,
Aye.
Member Husnick,
Aye.
Member Finneman,
Aye.
Member Lorge,
Aye.
Member Erickson,
Aye.
and President Bain.
Aye. Motion's approved. Next item this evening, the downtown planner presentation discussion. Dan, do you want to pick up this conversation from where we left it last and navigate us through, please?
Absolutely. President, members of the EDA, members of the Downtown Committee. What's before each night is a continuation of the last Downtown Committee meeting, which did come to a rather abrupt end due to some Zoom issues that we had here on the city side. So I'm hopeful that we don't have a duplication of that tonight and we're able to complete this conversation. But we are bringing this back to the Downtown Committee, which, for discussion, which was originally planned for January 25th. The main goal for tonight is to have the Downtown Committee to discuss the proposals and the presentations that were given by the planning firms. And ultimately, staff is looking for direction on which firm the Downtown Committee would prefer to engage in for planning services for our downtown planning project. Just to get everybody on the same page, there were two proposals that were presented during the January 25th meeting. One was from HKGI and the other one was from the Cunningham Group. I did put both of those proposals in the packet for this meeting, as well as the follow-up materials that was requested. Both firms did get that follow-up material to me in a very timely fashion. I believe it was the next day for both of them. So I included both of those. So the EDA and Downtown Committee had those proposals at your fingertips. I do want to let the EDA and Downtown Committee know that I did reach out to the firms after the presentations were made and just ask for a couple of follow-up questions, specifically as it pertained to their implementation plan. I feel that was one area of the proposals that was a little bit sort of went over rather quickly. I just had some follow-up questions that, how they plan to implement the plans. Because I think there's always sort of that fear when you go through a planning process, you kind of go through all the exercise of getting the plan developed, it gets approved, and then there's always that fear that that plan is going to sit on the shelf and not go to an implementation stage. So I did ask the two firms, say, what's your experience with implementation and what's your approach to implementation? The Cunningham Group, when I spoke with them, their implementation strategy is more formed on taking the plan that they develop and having an implementation kickoff meeting where they bring stakeholders in that's helped develop the plan, elected officials, members of different boards and commissions, community members at large. And then based on that, they look at the plan and sort of look at what are the initiatives contained within the plan. And then based on those initiatives, they look at, selecting, a number of initiatives to start working on, and then ask the group to really narrow that down to one initiative. And then based on that one initiative, they sort of take that then down to the next level and develop sort of a strategy for implementation on that. Kind of an overall feel that I got from the Cunningham Group as their approach to implementation is they view this more as a roadmap to completion rather than, kind of a straight A, B, C, D kind of a sequential approach. I think they realize that, when you're implementing a plan, you need to be reactive to market conditions, to other, things that come, online, sequencing, et cetera. So they sort of offer that more roadmap approach to their implementation strategy for the plan. When I spoke with HKGI, we talked about, again, their implementation strategy. But one thing that really stuck out during that conversation was part of their proposal does include a full CIP for their plan. So in looking at what they present, so when their plan is done, as part of that, they do develop a full capital improvement plan. So not only do you get the plan, you also get the cost of implementing the public investment side of that plan. This is very similar to how the airport layout plan is being done. So the airport's going through a layout plan right now, which is in essence a guiding document, planning document for the airport's growth over the next 10, 15, 20 years. But a big component of that is not only do we have the project list, the hangar expansions, additional taxiways, et cetera, but we know the cost of those. So we can start budgeting for those today rather than down 10 years down the road. So we can make sure that the fund is healthy enough to take on those projects down the road. There is, from a staff's perspective, a large value in having a fully executed CIP plan for any type of downtown plan. It really does help to anchor that plan in reality. I think if you sort of plan outside of capital, you kind of run the risk of getting a really aspirational plan out there, but it can tend to lose touch with where it can be because you're not necessarily as tied to the costing element. But if you have a capital improvement plan, it does kind of help to anchor that in reality. It also, a capital improvement plan would really help to position the EDA from more of a reactive budget standpoint to more of a proactive budget standpoint. We'd be able to proactively budget for those capital improvements down the road. Obviously, sequencing can change based on market conditions, but we would have a pretty good idea of what the cost of those projects would be long term. So HKGI, I think on the implementation side, does have a little bit of an advantage when it comes to doing the implementation side with the inclusion of the CIP in there for the whole plan as presented. As part of tonight's discussion, I think when you're looking at these plans and you're looking at specifically the cost of these plans, one thing to keep in mind is don't necessarily focus on just strictly the cost element, view it as an investment. These downtown plans do generate investments in downtown. They generate projects, they generate additional, development and redevelopment that happens. So I think when you're looking at the cost of the plans, if you look at it in terms of what's the best investment for the city of Forest Lake to make, what's the best investment of EDA dollars, and look at it more from the perspective of which plan is going to give you a better return on that investment. Because just like a financial investment yields returns in the financial sense, a downtown plan will also yield returns in terms of projects, a stronger economic base for the city, and more a plan that's more attainable at the end of the day. So again, just kind of recommend that the EDA looks at this from the perspective of an investment standpoint rather than a straight cost standpoint. With that, I'll turn the conversation over to the Downtown Committee, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have on the proposals or anything sort of on the overall process to date.
And before we get started on the conversation here, just a quick note of clarification. Are you looking for a approval this evening? Are you looking for feedback for next steps? What's the requested action tonight of the group?
It'd be at this point feedback. I didn't go back to the group just to let them know, sort of which group was selected as a recommended in that proposal we brought forward for adoption or acceptance at a future EDA meeting. So okay. I apologize for that. That is the requested action.
Nope, that's great. Thank you. I'm interested in feedback. We've seen a lot of materials and have heard presentations. I'm interested in feedback and any questions that you may have, preferences. Just open it up for some open discussion here. Go ahead, Susan.
Question of the group. One of the proposers is not going to be doing a lot of in-person meetings. They are expecting to get all of their input from the community online or through websites. And the other one is thinking about some focus groups. Remembering how our previous engagement efforts, both in person and strictly online, have occurred, I'd be interested to hear the thoughts of the group on your preferences.
Well, I think from a preference standpoint, I mean, if you're able to solicit both means, you're likely to capture a greater percentage, because there's some that just want to operate in person and others that probably, especially in our current pandemic condition, would probably opt for an online interaction anyway. But if we've got the option to do both, I mean, that seems like the better value.
Go ahead, Mark.
Just a couple of quick questions before I make a statement about that. How many businesses are presently participating? Just numerically, how many businesses in our downtown committee are presently participating in our downtown committee? 3, 4, 5?
That are active participants?
Active, yes.
Yeah, I'd say probably that 3 to 4. I mean, the invite list is a lot larger than that, but the ones that actually attend, we're looking at probably 3 or 4.
Okay, and the other question I have is, are city conference rooms presently available to small group meetings, 4 to 8 people kind of story?
No.
Not at all at this point? Is that a city choice? Because that's not a state regulation.
So you asking, I mean, in terms of what's the context there, Mark? I'm just trying to get my head around.
When I think about how to communicate with the businesses, the idea of small group meetings face-to-face is the ideal way to go. And if we're already restricting that and it has to go either online or telephone or otherwise, then we're already restricting how we can talk to people. Given the number of people that are participating right now and businesses that are participating, I know of many more that have a lot to say, but they're not involved at this point. The way to get them involved is to really have a focused face-to-face story with a few people.
Yeah, the governor's order is for social distancing. The emergency order is still in place. That's what the city's following. We have closed off all of the meeting rooms to the general public until that's lifted, because we really don't have a big enough room for that kind of crowd to.
Well, I'm not talking about a crowd. I have met with Cambridge,
know, but-
Roseville, and both of those cities certainly can space and mask and still talk in a room.
Yeah, we've closed off the whole city hall to any groups at this point, still following the governor's orders as far as his
Well-
emergency orders go.
It's beyond the governor's orders, as best I can tell. Well, that restricts us, certainly. So I also think that our communication with all the businesses and the amount of, I think, more extensive programming meetings that need to take place is underestimated by both of the planning groups. And that just needs to be noted, as Susan said. There's a catch to how we talk to people. And one of the most important things is to talk to the people about their business and how they situate in downtown.
So a couple of things. So one, council has actually, the extension of the extension of the emergency orders on our agenda for this evening. I'm happy to bring that back to conversation and, reconsider if there are some options for at least some small groups to meet in person. I don't offhand know what those answers are. And so, but certainly there's opportunity for perhaps some council conversation on that topic. I think the question would be, or the answer there would be the same over either group. I think Susan's point was more to, there's a difference in approach in the plans and what is, overall preference related to approach.
Looks like Susan has a follow-up.
My internet is incredibly unstable. So is everybody hearing me okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
If I could just add one comment to the in-person versus remote, feedback option. When I did speak initially to both groups, I think they both preferred trying as much in person as possible, realizing that is the most effective way to do planning exercises and get that feedback. But I think realistically trying to respond to the COVID impact that we're having right now, I think they're both trying to put together the flexibility within the proposals to allow a shift if we can go to in-person, to get that in-person feedback. And if we need to stay remote, to at least get the infrastructure in there to allow for community feedback to happen in a digital environment. So I think both are willing to work on both in-person and digital.
Susan, go ahead.
Actually, Cunningham does not include any in-person in their base proposal. It would be an additional amount. I guess I have a real concern about not only just getting input from the businesses, but input from the broader community. If everybody in this group was willing to engage their social media contacts, their whatever you happen to be using, I think there's a possibility that we could get good feedback from the community, not being in person. But unless the Lake folks were to engage their social media folks, and the council members were all to engage theirs, and the chamber were to engage theirs, I really don't believe that we're going to get folks knowing that this process is even going on. So I'm looking for both of these groups to give me a little bit more oomph in how they're going to engage the community, and I'm still feeling just a tad bit stung on the 2040 comp plan and the really limited amount of public feedback we got on a super critical document.
Susan, I would counter that though but since we have gone to remote meetings, the Planning Commission in particular has had maybe some very robust, public engagement periods and some really good neighborhood discussions, and people that have testified that otherwise wouldn't, because the word has gotten to them and that we've provided the means. And so I think your message is well taken in that, the communication plan to get people involved or to make them aware is certainly important. But I think we've seen where people will engage if given the opportunity. And if that happens to be online, they will do it. So go ahead.
We've had that engagement because on these specific proposals, people got individual letters at their home that there was a project that was being discussed next door to them. And also because with the zoning changes, a sign is required to be placed on the property. And so folks got a direct individual, hi, guess what we're doing here, letter, or they saw a sign as they were going to and from their home. I'm not sure have we got billboard sort of budget? I'm really concerned about folks that wouldn't get a letter or wouldn't get somebody knocking on their door or a sign posted near their neighborhood that this is being discussed.
Go ahead, Jerry.
Yeah, Susan, I can appreciate
Go ahead,
exactly. Susan, I can appreciate exactly what you're saying. However, I would also suggest that, the old 80-20 rule, that you can solicit 100% of the people and only 20% of them or some number are going to be the ones that want to participate. And I do believe, as you said, if we do a good job of crafting the message through social media, through, the different data centers and email databases and Facebook pages and stuff like that, I think you might be surprised how fast it would spread through social media that there is a request out there for input from the public. Particularly, I think yet early in this year, as spring and summer come, people get busier and you're going to have less participation, unfortunately. So, one of the first meetings I know was supposed to be happening in March and April, which is a perfect time to bring, I think, a focus group or focus groups together. If we feel that there's not enough community outreach or not enough community support individual meetings, we can always ask the consultants to add another one in there. They're happy to do that. But again, let's be productive if we're going to add, in-person meetings. That's all. Just need to be productive.
Other feedback points related to the plans. We've got two very different plans in front of us, and we've been talking about community engagement. What were some of the other things that either you saw as positives or questions that you would like Dan to get before this comes back to us for a decision? Mark, go ahead.
Well, I might value things here differently than others, but I value programming highest on the list, then design exploration second highest, and then presentation and involvement maybe third. One example of the programming is, I don't know if anybody's anticipating, but we have this dilemma downtown about the impact of watersheds. And the whole goal of development is really maximum utilization is what justifies investment. And we don't have any sense of those limits at this point that I'm aware of. Long-term planning certainly does need the city, and if the city can maneuver the off-site water management solutions so downtown can really define its density, then we will be able to understand how we pack this thing called a downtown. So that takes a good deal of programming effort. And it takes the city's involvement as well, because I don't know if anybody's trying to compel an outcome with the watersheds. And that's one concern I have about programming.
Go ahead, Jerry. Jerry, can you hold that for just a second? Mark, when you talk about programming, can you bring that back to either of the two proposals and so given that lens, is there a proposal that you see strikes more to what you're looking for? Was there a contender you saw stronger in the programming area?
I saw limits with both in terms of time expenditure that I saw their proposals make in terms of understanding there's going to be these, fairly consequential nuances in the game. So either one can rise to the occasion if in fact what you do when you talk about their proposals and you focus in on one group, you compel them to accomplish certain things. I mean, the negotiations on this planning group is not set yet. There's things that we can negotiate yet about what they should accomplish and what they don't have to accomplish. And I would try and impact both of them about these kinds of issues that are fairly critical downtown. There's this tendency to make these planning design efforts more complicated than they really are. And so on the opposite side of the coin, I think that the dynamics of our downtown area are not that varied and hard to understand. And I also think that our public parks and lands are kind of limited and constrained, and the circulation patterns are fairly well reasonably defined, and private property is what needs to be understood and supported and shown its context. And those things are different allocations of time. And I wish we could talk to them and say, well, look, let's gear it this way versus that way.
Thank you for that. Jerry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Just my personal opinion after reading through both proposals again and reading the follow-up, both from Bruce and from Andrew. To be candid, I personally like the layout, the format, and the simplification that HKGI provided. If you look at their follow-up documents as an example, it's simple to look at for lay people in particular. For example, their implementation framework that they provided, it's clear, there's a checkbox with it. It feels simple and visual, which I think is very important, particularly if we're going to try to be communicating this to the public in general. I think HKGI will perhaps give us and the implementation plan of getting the CIP, I think is absolutely critical long-term for us. And they gave us those examples of those CIP costs, in their follow-up documentation. And I really liked what I saw there because I felt that's exactly what we need to have also. It's one thing to have a plan and a program and say, okay, here it is, and then it gets put on the shelf again. So it seems long-term, if we are very, very serious about this plan, that we need to understand, as Dan indicated earlier, we need to understand the CIP costs of this for the next 10, 15, 20 years. And I think I like Bruce as an individual because he has a very varied experience background. If you listen to what he did, he left the industry, did some other stuff, financial, came back. So he's the kind of individual, I think, that's very well rounded as far as bringing the whole thing together. And the last thing, Mark, you brought up the Watershed plan for downtown. Just so you know, I reached out to Mike Kenny with the Watershed District and asked what was the timing of them completing that, because that's a critical element of the kickoff for this plan. And I think we need to be cognizant of that as to the timing of that. There is no defined completion date for that yet. So I know there's some emails going back and forth between the consultants and the Watershed, and I believe city engineer. So something that everybody needs to understand is that if that's not going to be delivered until this summer, our whole schedule needs to be reconsidered in this process here too.
I would agree
Mayor,
with that, the major piece.
Ryan,
just
go
to comment
ahead.
on that quickly, city staff met today to go over a draft of that study. Significant amount of the work's done. Next step would be to engage the Watershed prior, still at a staff level. Obviously, there's three major areas within that study. The downtown second to second is obviously one, and with current regulations and permitting requirements, there is a lot of roadblocks there when it comes to developing the square footage and the thresholds set within, and the landlocked and non-city land that's available, or what parking might be taken away to retrofit some of that stuff. So we need to really dive deep into that with the watershed, probably at a real permit analogy kind of situation, because the other two areas have significant options and flexibility moving forward with enhancements and regional drainage. That second to second, that's a whole different story. So, that's kind of where we're at now. We had a great discussion today with city staff, public works administration, planning, and some water resource engineers and myself. So that's where we're at right now. So that's the update.
Ryan, in your opinion, do you have concern over either of the timelines that are proposed in this project and that project? Are there too many timeframe conflict points, or is there some parallels that make them complementary?
I would not worry about the stormwater project in relative to speed. Even by the time you guys execute a contract with the downtown study, you're probably a month out.
Okay.
Just getting the contract. So we will certainly have our meeting with the watershed before a month. So
That's helpful. Thank you. Other feedback points? Mark, go ahead.
Talker here. I'm not sure on the HKGI proposal that any of the additional services are of great value. I think our peer communities have different dynamics, and I would expect actually the planners to come with a general expertise and awareness of that would suffice. I also believe that picking out catalyst sites will be sufficiently understood in the 3 schematic design scenarios and carried to a great enough detail not to have to deal with 18,000 additional costs to accomplish those 2 things. So I don't value those 2 additional services.
Thank you. Other points? I will chime in here. My thoughts are much like Jerry's. I did appreciate the level of detail that is in the HKGI plan. Also, their CIP, I think, is just absolutely required as we come out of this, and something that we think about having to grow around, and it's the quantification that helps us to decide, the scalability of this overall project and how does that fit with everything else that's happening within the city. And so having that plan and being able to drop that plan into things like the city's new 10-year financial plan, I just think that is an absolutely valuable resource. And also their plan overall just feels more tactical to me. More detailed, and walking out with an implementation next steps just provides a level of definition that I didn't see in the Cunningham proposal. One of the things I'm struggling with, though, is getting to more of an apples to apples comparison, because they are very different. And on one hand, that's natural because there's two different approaches. But I'm wondering, Dan, if we hear this feedback, if there's an opportunity for us to try to have some sort of a comparison point that does allow for as much apples to apples comparison as where that exists, and where they're just different, let's do a call out for that, just to help us quantify if one plan is more expensive than the other. In current state, that is drastically the case. What are those additional elements that make up that cost, so that we can decide, are those absolute must-haves that we need to have and are worth it? Or are those things that would be extra? As Mark just pointed out, there's a couple of supplemental services that we may just not need. Having that side by side as much as possible would really help me in coming to a final decision, and just feeling good about the completeness of that plan and what those associated costs are.
And to that point, I did ask HKGI on their proposals, because it says a not to exceed. But they obviously went through and line itemed out pricing in terms of to get to that point. But one thing on a side-by-side comparison, bear in mind too, when this went out for the consultants to bid on, there was that scope of work, which outlined all the different points, and the HKGI came back pretty much in line with what the scope of work was. Cunningham sort of bid loosely associated with that, with the total cost of 50,000, or roughly give or take for their plan. I'd have to go back to Cunningham Group and actually have to have them go back through then and provide that detail based on the scope, because I think looking at their proposal, what they sent over, it's going to be pretty hard to pull that information out, since I think it's more kind of lumped together, so to speak. And and when I look at the Cunningham plan, it's more of a as a Cliff Notes version of a plan, so to speak. And not saying that in a bad way or a critical way. I'm just thinking that when you get the plan from Cunningham, it's a little bit more aspirational, a little bit more Cliff Notes version. I think HKGI is definitely the more tactical plan with, here's your first item and here's what you need to accomplish that first item. But I can go back to Cunningham Group to see if they can provide more detail on it. But I think, bearing in mind that they were offered the same scope of work and they chose to bid that back differently, and with what they submitted back to the city.
My concern without that is that your original RFP was pretty specific on what we were looking for. And my concern without having that level of detail from them is, are we getting what we thought we wanted to purchase, is my concern. And if we've changed our minds because of what we've seen from them, that's a path we can consider. I just haven't heard that that's what we're looking for yet. And so if we're back to wanting that original scope, then I want to see a little more detail that lines up with that, even if that doesn't necessarily fit their model. Susan, I think you had your hand up.
Consulting firms are going to vary in their style, and I think that the style of the two proposals really does reflect what we will get. And I'm a little bit hesitant to ask the two firms to keep going back and spending money on refining their proposals, because they're going to have to get that money back one way or another. And so we'll just lose in the quality of the work. I think that the differences, Mayor, that you're noting really are the styles of the two firms, and it's part of what we need to decide. I'm not going to characterize the two styles. I'm going to be strong, but I think that's what we're going to get.
Toasted. Mark, go ahead.
And the Cunningham Group is going about this slightly different. Their process is kind of focused, and after their overview planning analysis, they approach solutions in a kind of site-specific and business specific, I'll say it again, specific manner. Specific. They have market expertise that ties them to brokerage and to developers, and they bring that kind of developer awareness to a site. I think they think more, as an architectural firm would think, that it's going to be site-specific outcomes more than it's going to be anything else. And so I think that's where they tended to carry their difference from the other firm.
Other thoughts, feedback for Dan at this point? Mark, go ahead.
I never know when to stop.
No, this is good.
Both firms have the expertise to do this. They have the planning and the graphic ability to do this. They do approach it differently. The larger, more planning-oriented firm is trying to be very holistic and cover all the bases. The Cunningham Group was a little bit more focused on what their direction was. I would like to think that we really could go back to at least the predominant firm that people might agree on tonight and customize their proposal. It's odd to get just the two initial proposals and not go back and try and choreograph it a little more specifically. So I think you could go back to them and set a finite budget after you talk about what you would expect them to do. And I don't think that takes a whole lot of effort on either their part or our part. I like the idea of TOOP still being pursued. I see a distinction between the two. You've already gotten my opinion about how complicated I think this story is or needs to be. And so I might just be thinking differently than everyone else is here.
other feedback points or things you would like to see as this comes back? Dan, as you hear this conversation, other specific questions for this group?
No, I think, I mean, I'm just trying to get, from what I'm hearing here, you want to go back and try to re-dive into that more additional detail of the proposals? Or, I mean, I want to make sure I summarize what we've discussed, because like firms initially, we kind of went through that scope of work and developed a fairly robust scope of work to start with, which, at that point encapsulated the bulk of the plan. And I think, as has been commented here tonight, you are seeing two different approaches. And I don't know necessarily if you go back to both firms and say, we want to update the approach, if that's going to yield different results. Because when I speak with both different planning firms, they do have a very different philosophical approach to planning. That you can just get that in talking to the different planning groups that are there. So I think going back to the groups with sort of, okay, we want more detail now. I think that should have been done, in my opinion, at the scope work. They responded to our scope. We see one that's in line, HKGI basically mirrored our scope pretty close to what we asked for. And the Cunningham group sort of kind of lumped them together as in their, approach to bid. And I think that's what you'd see in the plan set. But bear in mind, when I talk to, communities that they both planned for, some communities really like that more general lumped together approach, and that kind of they're extremely happy with that. Other communities want that more tactical HKGI. So I think if we go back one more time, we're just going to get more detail about the same approach in my estimation at this point. So I think my recommendation would be to go with one, and we can go back, and if we need to make some small tweaks to that scope with the singular firm, just to make sure it aligns up, I think that's my recommendation to go back to. Otherwise, I think we're just going to potentially have this meeting in perpetuity for, another couple sessions as we start to really kind of go through and can kind of continue to and delay the start of the planning process.
Go ahead, Mark.
I apologize for my complicating the story here, but another avenue or isolated part of this is that, in my opinion, the three schematic area designs form a much better resource for the future than drilling down to one singular outcome that is comprised, it's compilation of whatever you think that should be. That kind of an idea, going back to a planning group, suggests something to them as well. Do they have to refine to this one final thought, or is it best to remain with the three schematic developed approaches and maybe put more emphasis on those, so that we can see how far the city can bounce from one end to the other versus picking just one thing, because it'll become a very arbitrary idea at the end.
Blake, I think you had your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was unfortunately I wasn't able to see the presentation. I did listen to it while I was driving that evening traveling, but so I'm a little bit not up to speed on how the presentation went. But have we reached out to these other cities that they've done work for and got their feedback as to how the experience went and if they would suggest using them or not? I see they state Mountain View and Stillwater and a couple of these other cities. Is that an opportunity that maybe we could talk with their staff and just see how that went? And maybe that's already happened.
I can speak to that. I did reach out to cities that they've planned for. I didn't always necessarily use the ones that were in the proposals. I reached out to ones that they developed plans for both HKGI and Cunningham Group. And I will say both came with stellar recommendations. We had long conversation with the planning departments at Monticello, which Cunningham Group did a plan, for them. I also have spoken with Lindstrom, which they've done planning opportunities. Rita works out there as a planner, and both had glowing recommendations for both their approaches. But bear in mind, again, these communities have different approaches overall to how they want their plans to look. So, Monticello's, part of the reason what they told me was they sort of had a downtown plan, but they wanted a little bit more aspirational. So that's why they went back with the Cunningham Group, and they were happy with it. And they were happy with their implementation plan of the Cunningham Group does go back there annually and does kind of a check and review. They continue to contract with them for sort of ongoing implementation strategies, with that city. So, both groups have good recommendations, and both groups have been vetted in a recommendation standpoint. It's just sort of at the end, which one, which approach I think is, recommended, or does the downtown committee feel more comfortable with? Yeah. From a staff perspective, looking at it, I think a more tactical approach would be beneficial for City of Forest Lake, sort of giving where we are from a a staff standpoint behind the scenes, like having more of an outline of how to implement that plan. You know, if we had a fully staffed community development department right now with planners and a director and all sorts of member that could be associated, take up some of that work that comes out of more of a Cunningham style plan, I think that approach could be different. But I think kind of given where our current staffing levels are, I think that more tactile plan, that more drilled down plan would be beneficial to make sure that we can start working on it and not have to delay implementation down because we just don't have capacity within current staffing levels to start that work.
Jerry, I think you may have had your hand up as well. Go ahead.
Yeah, I did. Dan, I would agree with you that, and Mark too, for that matter, that, you know, we have an opportunity to kind of customize the scope and the deliverables from whoever we select. Just because we have a document with a proposal right now, we're not locked into that. You know, I mean, we can modify it, we can change it yet. And I think that would be appropriate to do, to actually have a sit down session with them and go through it in detail, you know, for both parties to understand completely what makes sense, and maybe even ask them for a couple of suggestions or recommendations on what has been successful with other communities that we don't have, or maybe that we're duplicating on. So I think if we select the right firm and they're willing to work with us, we will ultimately come up with whatever modified contract we ultimately end up with the right deliverables. And I think we have enough smart enough people here involved in this that we can do that.
Agree. We do have a number of other agenda items on our plate tonight, so want to make sure we are keeping things moving to get through. We will want to adjourn tonight at about 6:50, so just do a quick time check. We're almost to 6:20. Other feedback points or anything that wasn't mentioned tonight that's on your mind as you're weighing pros and cons? All right. I'm not seeing anything. Dan, do you have feedback of what's needed for tonight?
I guess preferred, I mean, before we wrap this up, is there, I mean, do we have a clear group that we want to go back to at this point? I mean, do we feel comfortable with if I reach back out, if I have to call a planning group tomorrow, which one should I call to say, we need additional details? You know, that's the question I need answered, you know, so we can continue moving this ball forward. And at this point, from what I've gathered from this meeting, I don't have that clear, we want to go with plan, you know, firm A or firm B at this point.
Susan, you think you had your hand up?
I guess I don't feel comfortable with the Cunningham group, but there's a lot of folks here that are smart folks that I haven't heard anything from. And so I'd really like y'all's thoughts, but I'm not as comfortable with the Cunningham group.
I appreciate Susan's previous perspective on, you know, is there value in going back and having them be more specific, and because they are kind of showing us with their style the difference in the proposal. I agree. So I agree with that. That we probably won't get the apples to apples comparison I would maybe like to have. So I'm leaning towards HKGI. I'm interested in, but I recognize that's the larger proposal. And so I guess I'm interested in kind of an Forest Lake optimization of that proposal of, do we need the full thing, or are there areas of that we may scale differently? Because we do have, you know, another opportunity to do something that is substantially less cost. But I also, when I see the elements that they've included in the plan, I can appreciate there is a lot of work that goes into a CIP plan. And so if that is part of the deliverable, there is immense value in that. And a quantification and a specification that kind of requires a very robust planning process. And so I can equate some value to that, how that relates to the, you know, our final number that we'll contract on. You know, that's where I'm just looking for as much specificity as possible. Sam, go ahead.
Yeah, Mara, I'm leaning that direction also.
Sam, you're cutting out a little bit.
Sorry about that. Is it better now?
Yes.
Their presentation was very concise and to the point, and I'm
You're
leaning
cutting
the same direction. I'm leaning the same direction.
Very good. Leif, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was just curious about Dan's comment in talking to some of the cities that had used Cunningham. You referenced that they have an ongoing contract with them to do check-ins. Is that a part of the process with both companies, or is that just kind of unique to Cunningham? Because maybe they're coming in lower at the expectation that there's going to be this ongoing annual contract to actually implement, what they came up with. How does that pair out against the other one?
Great question. I did actually ask that question of both firms. And I said, so ongoing contract opportunities, I said, I didn't want a firm to put this together and then walk away, never be able to, access their expertise down the road. Both offer those services. Cunningham, it can do it either on a retainer basis or on a per project basis. Same thing with HKGI. They said if you're going through this and you implement part of the plan, need some expertise and a specific part of the project, they're willing to come in on either that project bid or some cities have them basically as quasi staff. They just put them on a retainer and they're in on that aspect as well. So both firms do offer that ongoing consulting standpoint, and some cities do choose to do that just because it does assist with implementation long term.
Knowing that there's quite a disparity in their initial proposal, is there as great a disparity in their ongoing retainer, or what are we looking at for ongoing costs?
I never asked them. I didn't get an estimate for ongoing costs. At this point, I focused more on the planning side of it, and then the start of the implementation side. I did not ask for ongoing implementation costs at this point. I mean, I can go back to them, but I don't know what those fees would be at this point.
And I could imagine that could vary immensely based on the nature of the ongoing work, right?
Well, if it's a retainer situation, right? I mean, of course, if it's on a project base, then it would, need to be commiserate with the project. But if it's a retainer type basis, I would guess they have probably a standard schedule. But yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm leaning towards HKGI just from their presentations themselves. One, they seem much more confident, considering their first date, with us. That was probably their best foot forward, and they just seem to have a lot more confidence as we were, they were fielding questions. I do like the depth of their plan, and in my experience, you get what you pay for a lot of times too. So.
Go ahead, Fit.
I do think in general, the city is going to feel more comfortable with the larger scope that the HK, whatever their firm is offering. And I just want the opportunity to go back to the firms and have a two-way conversation about such things as, is that final compilation plan important to the story, or are three, varied plans still more important than that? There's a series of questions we can ask them. I don't have any idea how much the CIP portion is cost-wise. So those are the things I'd like to have some kind of a two-way discussion on, so we can actually say, you're our, shortlist preferred, vendor. Let's talk about how we can refine this development proposal and see what we can come up with.
Very good. I think I saw another hand up and may have missed.
That was
Jenny, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, I agree with Leif. I feel I've got a confidence level with HKGI that I don't have with the smaller group. I do think that they will lead us rather than us working with a more vague approach. I feel like they will take it, listen to us, and do it professionally, and we'll be happy with the results, and it'll be worth the difference in the money.
Very good. Any others wanting to chime in on preference at this point that haven't already spoken up? Tim, go ahead. Good to see you.
So I don't need to reiterate the points, but I like the HKGI proposal. I liked how they proposed, how they laid out their information, and the cities that they work with, some of them I'm pretty familiar with. So from that standpoint, from a level of comfort, I'm much more inclined to agree that we move forward with them.
Thank you. All right. I think we've heard from the room. This is all right. Dan, conclusion you were looking for?
I'm good now. What I will do is I'll reach out to HKGI. I'll ask them to come back to the next downtown committee meeting if it works with their schedules for that two-way conversation to kind of fully maybe go through the proposal a little bit more just to make sure everybody's comfortable with them. I'll let the Cunningham, if we can't, if at HKGI, I'll just say at this point, we'll talk about further refinement at this point and let the Cunningham group that they're not the preferred vendor at this point. But the HKGI is, and we'll hopefully, based on those conversations, we'll be able to get to a proposal that we can agree to, and then get them, see what the next steps is based on that next conversation with HKGI.
Very good. Thank you. All right, we're going to move on to our next agenda item this evening. Downtown committee members, you are welcome to stay on as attendees. Otherwise, you are also welcome to sign off. Thank you for being here and look forward to seeing you again at the end of the month. Just 2 more weeks. Nan, Chamber of Commerce Business Recovery, Growth and Revitalization Task Force. I think you're going to give us an update.
Yes, hello. Good evening, President Bain, members of the EDA and city staff. Tonight is serving as an introductory presentation to some work that we've been doing at the Chamber. And so I did want to update you, and I think that you will find pieces of this pertinent to the conversation that we just finished. First of all, just a little history about how this evolved. Our Business Recovery and Growth Task Force emerged as a result of those initial Zoom meetings that we were having early on, and actually through probably 7 months of COVID, where we gave business owners and organizational leaders an opportunity to come together. It then became a great venue for dispensing information as well. And so now, as I say that we collectively, the Chamber and our businesses, as well as the EDA and the plans that you all have just been talking about, I thought it was really important, knowing that this downtown revitalization was coming up. I wanted to be sure that I really clearly understood what was important to businesses, right? I thought I knew, but I thought, I wanted to give them an opportunity to come together. So what I simply did was facilitate meetings so that they could have conversations. And so that's what we've been doing for several months. And it's just gone along fantastic. We have a lengthy list of concerns and areas and ideas and all of that ready to go. And I found that so much of it paralleled some of the things that were being talked about with the downtown revitalization, as well as when we went over the detailed EDA plan. I was seeing just 2 things going parallel at the same time. And so I did have a conversation with Dan, and we thought that this would be a great time to come before the EDA and share that with you, so that you maybe we could bridge the gap a little bit from communicating with business with EDA. So that's really been my role in all of this, is to facilitate conversation. Really the mission behind the task force, this is what we presented, was that it's a place for local business and organizational leaders to discuss their concerns within a peer group, and then together brainstorm action steps to move forward on solutions. Collectively, this group will positively initiate and create an environment for business recovery and growth. So it's all around moving forward. I will let you know that we've probably had 15 to 20 businesses engaged in these conversations. Some at every meeting, some not quite so much. But all of these businesses, incidentally, are Forest Lake area businesses. So didn't ask for that, open it up to the entire chamber. But those that have been, the early adopters have all been Forest Lake area businesses, which again, I think plays nicely into the conversations that we've been having all evening. And again, this is just introductory, but I will share with you that the areas that fit, I thought, and Dan and I had a conversation about, that would fit this group. There's other things that we'll take on independently, but the things that we felt would be a good business sector and EDA collaboration were things like business district concerns. So the vacancies, the parking, the blight areas, things of that nature. Number 2, we had conversation about a building exteriors grant that the EDA has been talking about over the course of the last months. Also talk about partnership events with the use of the lake and other natural amenities. There have been some emergence of communication concerns within with the city and business, the business sector, around policy and things of that nature. So I think it's important that we just have in a safe environment. And then lastly, this one I thought was really good because again, you know, I think early on in my role and when Patrick first came on board, you know, I reached out, and this was all pre-COVID, but we talked about the role of city government. So I've had a request for education on of city government within our area. And so those were the top, you know, I was to categorize them. Those are 5 areas that we identified. And really the reason behind all of this, as far as why I'm bringing this to you, is I'd like to see continued progress in all of these areas of concern. And again, each of them, you know, some have more in depth, and much larger scope, others are smaller, but I want our goal really the task force and for me to be able to say to the businesses, these are the things, this is where we're making progress, because that's of course the whole point of the task force. And then the second thing, knowing that the Downtown Revitalization Committee was, you know, all of the work that we were doing that was coming to the fruition, my goal really too is to invite those businesses. They're coming forth and having a conversation in these task force meetings. Well, I'd like to see them move on and be part of these conversations around the downtown revitalization. Susan said we've got some great resources as far as business background and great ideas. And so together, I think between the EDA and the business sector, there's just a lot that could be shared information and shared ideas. And so that would be the goal. That in general is what is going on at the chamber with the growth and recovery task force.
Excellent. Thank you, Nan. Members of the EDA, what questions do we have for Nan of this evening, or feedback items?
Sounds like you have a great infrastructure of voices and stakeholders that will segue well with what we're trying to do on the downtown committee. So thanks for laying that groundwork.
Yeah, if I could add,
Blake, go ahead.
just that I've been involved a little bit in some of those meetings, and they are very productive and very helpful for local businesses. So I appreciate, Nan, the things you've done there. And it's good to get, you know, we talked about, I don't know, I think Susan had asked a question earlier about how many businesses are actually on this downtown committee. It's like, I don't know what we can do or why we don't have more stakeholders in these things. You know, you have 3 different businesses that are regularly attending the downtown committee. How do we get more? Nan seems to be able to reach out to much more based on just the chamber membership, but I just, you know, that's a question we all ask. I think Jerry I don't think he's on the call anymore to talk about the 2080 theory. And so how do we get more people involved in these things? So what you're doing, Nan, is great. And I don't know if we can utilize, I mean, going back to the downtown, our normal downtown committee, are those invites going out every week to this, like the same people, and we only get some people, you know, based on their schedule that are being involved and some that are not?
Karen, go ahead.
I send out approximately 50 invites for the downtown committee meetings. And I think I generally see 3 or 4 people out of that list.
Well, so that means
Nan, I guess I would add, go ahead.
I would say it's even more important to have the chamber and this group to help facilitate or get more information out. So it's, I guess you can have too many people or too many committees, but I think it's just crucial to partner with the chamber on this and have them included in all of it.
Nan and Blake, do you have specific feedback on, is there just lack of awareness that this group is meeting, of lack of participation? Is it that the structure is not defined enough? Are we moving too slow? I mean, is it poor process? What feedback can you give us on why or what do you know about the kind of lack of attendance?
I think that
Is anybody else's, Nan?
I can't hear
You're
that.
cutting up.
I can't hear her either.
I thought it was maybe my internet, but Nan, I think it's your internet is cutting up.
No.
No.
She sounds like a video game.
And so maybe something we can get some further feedback on. I would certainly love to hear that feedback at another time when connections are better. And certainly I've heard from a couple of members that are on the attendee list of, I'm so glad you're having the meetings, and they're kind of following along based on what's on the agenda from the sidelines. Haven't necessarily made the meetings yet, but are certainly on the side engaged, if that's a thing. But certainly if there's some things we could be doing differently on structure or even time of the meeting, whatever we could do to broaden that audience, certainly willing to consider it. The other thing I would ask is as I look at this list, not having the full context of hearing the full discussion on what items made the list, I see that there's a lot of alignment between what's on this list and what is on our 2021 work plan. But knowing what's on the 2021 work plan, which Dan is looking for approval tonight, I'd be interested in any feedback on things that either need to be accelerated or reprioritized, any changes that would come out of that recommendation. I see general alignment, but sometimes the devil is in the details. And if we are misaligned on some details, I'd love to hear that as well. And Nan, I think your internet connection is rough. Say it again. No. No. We can bring back, we can certainly bring back to another discussion. Our next agenda item is, though, to walk through that 2021 EDA work plan. And Dan's recommendation is, Dan is looking for approval tonight. Dan, I don't think there's any magic tonight if we needed to table that to our next meeting. However, also recognize that we are now into the second month of the year and want to keep moving on the work plan. So maybe we move on to that agenda item and gather some feedback.
Absolutely. President, members of the EDA, before you tonight is the updated work plan included for review and hopefully ultimately approval this evening. I won't go through it in the same level of detail that we went through during the last meeting on January 11th, but this new version does include the conversation points that were discussed during the January 11th meeting. All that feedback has been incorporated into the plan. One of the key points of that was a redrafting of goal number 4. If you recall, goal number 4 was support workforce development. The EDA feedback felt that was a little bit too vague and wanted some more specificity around that particular goal. So I did go back and I redrafted that one. So now it reads, support workforce development through the establishment of active partnerships with local businesses and workforce development / training providers to build a dynamic workforce for the city of Forest Lake. So it's a little bit more specific, keyed into how we're going to support workforce development here within the city. Wanted just to pull that one out because there was some specific conversation surrounding goal number 4. The rest of the main goals in the plan did not change, but mostly the changes here were based on action items, and that those changes were based on feedback during a previous meeting. There isn't as President Bain mentioned, there really isn't a huge pressing issue to approve tonight if you want more time to review this. We are still, this is still the loose guiding document that I'm still working on developing, work plan 421 on. The benefit of approving it tonight is I can then go back in and start to schedule these, some of these action steps and look at building out the rest of the first quarter, second quarter, and third quarter plans for 21. But with that, I'd be happy to take any feedback from the EDA on this updated plan, or looking for, ultimately approval of the plan tonight if the EDA does feel comfortable making that recommendation to approve.
Members of the EDA, thoughts, questions, feedback items? We've talked about this a number of times. Personally, I would prefer us to approve this evening unless there was any glaring points of conflict that either Blake or Nanette wanted to mention related to the feedback from the chamber group. This has been our working document that we've been working off of. And it's a working document. We can amend at any point. So even if we approve tonight and the next big idea comes in next week, we certainly have an opportunity to pivot. But just for clarity and consistency, I would make a recommendation we approve, but certainly want to hear feedback from the group as well. Judy, go ahead.
I absolutely agree. We've talked about this a lot. I think it is a working document, and I make a recommendation that we approve it tonight.
Do I hear a motion in that recommendation?
You do hear a motion. Yes, you do.
We've got a motion from Member Huntash. Sam, go ahead.
I'll second.
And we've got a second. We've got a second from Councilmember Husnick. Other discussions at this point?
I'll just give 2 cents worth on goal 4. I think you built that out really well compared to the Magnus previous. So thank you for that. Looks very, very good direction.
Excellent. Other feedback tonight or points of discussion?
I'm going to attempt to speak. Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you. Go ahead.
Great. I had a long conversation.
We hear you, but it's not. No. Try without your try again.
Is it better without camera?
No, it's not really.
No, I can't hear.
Your camera wasn't working before.
I guess.
No. Nan, if you wanted to drop some feedback items into the chat window, we could try that. We've got a motion and a second on the table. If we, here we go. So Nan's chat, Dan and I discussed in detail, and most are addressed in the plan.
And I can just build off of that at that
Please.
point. I'll just, without trying to put words in Annette's mouth, but we did discuss a lot of what that working group had issues with the city, or kind of what their concerns were. And I did say a lot of those were already included in this 2021 work plan. And, I said by adopting the work plan tonight, I think you'll see some of those major concerns that downtown or that revitalization group are going to be addressed. And like I mentioned to her, I think at the end of 21, this ball is going to be a lot further down the court than it is currently, just because this work plan is representative of a lot of the active conversations that are happening within the community. So there's good alignment between this work plan and what we're seeing coming out of that group. So I think adoption will help to advance a lot of those issues that we're seeing coming forward now.
Excellent. And Nan says yes, yes, and yes. So very good. All right, we have a motion on the table and a second. And Karen, could we have a roll call vote, please?
Member Roberts,
Aye.
Member Huntash,
Aye.
Member Husnick,
Aye.
Member Finneman,
Aye.
Member Lorge,
Aye.
Member Erickson,
Aye.
President Bain.
Aye, and work plan is approved. Our next agenda item this evening is city updates. And Patrick or Dan, do you want to talk through city updates? And I know Member Finneman had a question about kind of general update related to Castlewood.
Yeah, I'll start, and Dan has more he can certainly add. Just a few things. The council at their last meeting approved a new paving policy for basically the downtown area that changed the ratio of a special assessment. So we will hopefully within this year get the last gravel road paved that exists in downtown. Waiting on the process and the ownership of the lots to fill out some paperwork and see if they agree to all that. So that's moving forward. As far as Castlewood goes, since there hasn't been a lot of public information out there, and that's only because it's a multifaceted approach that we have to take because there's a number of different things involved here. We have almost come to a final agreement for the golf course operator contract for this next year. We're very happy with that. We have just a few language issues going. We've also have had very productive talks with the restaurant owner and regarding the parking and the clubhouse. So that's moving on well. We expect that would be settled within hopefully this week, and we'll move forward with that. And then finally, when you talk about the building itself, that building, whether the decision there is going to the Parks, Lakes and Trails Commission for their consideration, and also to the council to see if they want to move forward. We'll leave it in their hands. They're the ones who should be deciding whether that's something we should do. But all three of those last things are going well, and we should hopefully wrap up most of the golf course, or at least some of the major issues, by the end of the week. Ryan already talked about the Watershed meeting we had this afternoon. It was a real good meeting. We made a lot of progress there, and we will have a joint meeting with the Watershed District to go over some of the issues and very difficult issues in some of the areas of the study that we'll have to address. And finally, I think we talked at the last meeting, or somebody, Dan might have mentioned, the airport business park, the two lots that the city proposed to sell that was approved by the city council. Those should close in about 2 weeks. We've got the title work almost done, and the owner's very happy with that. And hopefully we'll have a brand new building up in the airport business park by the end of the 2021.
Right.
Excellent. We are running a little short on agenda time, so we are going to jump to Chris for a Washington County update. Chris,
President,
thanks for being here. Oh, go ahead.
I just
Dan, go ahead.
have just a comment off Judy's comment there about the downtown incentive programs. We do have two active applications that came in. They're currently being processed, and I'll get those on a future agenda as soon as I get all the supporting materials that I need to complete those applications. So we do have active applications that are in at this point. They're just getting processed.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Chris, glad you're here.
Thank you, President Bain and members. Good evening. Just a really quick update for you. I had mentioned earlier in one of the previous meetings that we had another round of business relief grants available. That application deadline closed on Thursday last week, and we received 613 applications countywide for a total of $7.5 million, which was more than what the state made available. We did believe all along that there would be a lot of demand for the money, and there was. We had about $5 million available throughout the county. We will get all the way through the first priority businesses and hopefully through the second priority businesses, but the county board will meet tomorrow to decide if they want to prorate the grant amounts available. There will likely be some applications that were submitted that will not get funded. But we're going to try to get down that list as far as we can, knowing that we want to help as many businesses as possible with the recovery efforts. So I'll keep you posted as we move forward. But there was certainly a lot of demand for the grants and a lot of need still out there for the businesses right now. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. I know Nan's having some internet challenges. Jenny, do you want to do a chamber update? Anything further beyond other than what we've spoken about tonight?
No, she did a really good job.
Excellent. Very good. Let me just do a quick check. We are at the end of our planned agenda and actually just right on time. Thank you for a great discussion this evening. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
And I'll second.
A motion from member Lorge and a second from member Huntosh. And Karen, could we have a roll call vote, please?
Member Roberts,
Aye.
Member Huntosh,
Aye.
Member Husnick,
Aye.
Member Finneman,
Aye.
Member Large,
Aye.
Member Erickson,
Aye.
and President Bain.
Aye. Aye. We're adjourned, everybody. Have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you.